The morning of September 10th, 2025, dawned with an air of calculated menace in Beijing. Tiananmen Square, a space so often associated with internal turmoil, was transformed into a stage for global defiance. A river of steel and humanity flowed through its vast expanse, a meticulously choreographed display of China's military might. This was no ordinary parade. It marked the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II, a historical milestone repurposed as a visceral statement of present-day power. Seated prominently on the rostrum was President Xi Jinping, flanked by two figures whose very presence amplified the message. President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Together, they presented a united front, a tableau of authoritarian solidarity aimed squarely at the West. The spectacle was breathtaking in its scale and ambition. It was, by all accounts, China's largest ever military procession, a demonstration designed to leave no doubt about Beijing's capabilities. Rows of elite soldiers marched with unnerving precision, their synchronized steps echoing like a single thunderous heartbeat. They were followed by an arsenal of cutting-edge hardware, much of it never before seen in public. New hypersonic weapons, capable of evading any known missile defense system, rolled past the assembled dignitaries. Nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missiles, underwater drones, and advanced fighter jets underscored a single, undeniable truth. Thousands of miles away in the pre-dawn quiet of Washington, D.C., the images from Beijing were being consumed with mounting fury. Inside the White House, President Donald Trump watched the broadcast, his reaction a volatile mix of indignation and alarm. Xi, Putin, Kim standing together in a show of force, a direct affront to his foreign policy narrative. This was not the world order he had envisioned. This was a direct challenge to his authority on the global stage, and he was not one to let such a challenge go unanswered. The response, when it came, was swift, raw, and unfiltered. Taking to his preferred medium, the social media platform he had founded, President Trump unleashed a tirade that sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels worldwide. He did not mince words. He saw not a commemoration, but a conspiracy. For South Korea, the images from Beijing and the subsequent fury from Washington were not just distant political theater. They were a direct and immediate crisis. The government in Seoul watched the developments with a growing sense of dread, caught in the geopolitical crossfire between its primary security guarantor and its largest trading partner. On one side stood the United States, its long-standing ally, whose military presence guaranteed its security against an aggressive North Korea. On the other stood China, a behemoth neighbor whose economic gravity was impossible to ignore and whose cooperation was essential for managing the peninsula's stability. Now, with the leaders of China aligned, now, with the leaders of Russia aligned, now, with the leaders of North Korea aligned, that delicate balancing act was becoming nearly impossible. President Lee Jae-myung, in office for just a few challenging months, found himself navigating a diplomatic minefield. His administration was already grappling with what analysts were calling the Trump risk. The unpredictability and unilateralism of the American president's foreign policy. The old certainties of the post-Korean War era were dissolving, replaced by a volatile and uncertain future. The strategic calculus for South Korea has become agonizingly complex, forcing a fundamental reassessment of its decades-old foreign policy orientation. The Pull of Beijing is not merely a matter of geography, it is an economic imperative. China is, by a significant margin, South Korea's largest trading partner, the primary destination for its exports, and a critical link in its supply chains. This economic interdependence gives Beijing immense leverage. Any significant disruption in trade official sanctions, unofficial boycotts, could cripple the South Korean economy. This reality forces Seoul to tread carefully, as alienating China is a risk that carries immediate and severe domestic consequences, a fact not lost on President Lee's administration. This economic reliance is compounded by a growing skepticism in Seoul about the steadfastness of the American security guarantee. President Trump's America First doctrine has introduced a level of transactionalism that unnerves traditional allies. His repeated complaints about the cost of stationing US troops in South Korea and his public flirtations with withdrawing them have sown deep seeds of doubt. The fear in Seoul is that the US commitment is no longer ironclad but conditional, subject to the whims of a president who views alliances as balance sheets. This perceived unreliability makes the prospect of hedging, of building stronger ties with China as a form of strategic insurance, an increasingly logical if risky proposition. Among the myriad anxieties plaguing Seoul, one issue stands out as particularly perilous: the prospect of a conflict over Taiwan. This is really the ultimate nightmare scenario for South Korean strategists, a potential flashpoint that would force an impossible choice. Washington has been increasingly vocal about its commitment to defending Taiwan, and there's this growing expectation that, in the event of a crisis, it would call upon its regional allies for support. South Korean lawmakers have openly expressed deep-seated fears that Washington could demand a tangible commitment from Seoul to intervene if a conflict erupts in the Taiwan Strait. Such a demand would place South Korea in an untenable position, forcing it to choose between its security ally and its economic lifeline. For South Korea, entanglement in a Taiwan conflict would be catastrophic. Siding with the United States would inevitably invite the full wrath of Beijing, not just economically, but potentially militarily. China would view any South Korean support for a US intervention, even logistical, as a direct act of hostility. The resulting economic retaliation would be swift and devastating, far exceeding previous disputes over missile defense systems. Furthermore, it could provoke China to unleash North Korea, opening a second front on the Korean peninsula and plunging the region into a multi-front war. The risks are so immense that participation is seen as a national red line, an action that would jeopardize South Korea's very existence for a conflict in which it has no direct stake. While President Trump's social media posts ignited a firestorm in Western capitals, the reaction from Beijing was a study in practiced composure. There were no reciprocal insults, no angry denunciations. Instead, the Chinese government responded with a calm, almost dismissive shrug. When questioned about Trump's explosive accusation of a conspiracy, the Chinese Foreign Ministry deployed the full weight of its diplomatic blandness. The response was a masterclass in strategic deflection, designed to portray China as a responsible global actor and Trump as an erratic and unreliable statesman. At a press briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun delivered Beijing's official line with an air of serene detachment. He explained that world leaders had simply been invited to Beijing to attend the commemorations marking 80 years since the end of World War II, a historically significant and solemn occasion. The implication was clear. Trump was misinterpreting a gesture of peace as an act of aggression. China's development of diplomatic relations with any country has never been targeted at any third party, Guo stated. This seemingly innocuous statement was a direct, albeit subtle, rebuttal to Trump's entire worldview. It rejected the zero-sum logic of great power competition, proposing instead a vision of international relations where cooperation is possible without creating adversarial blocs. The strategic anxieties in Seoul have been dramatically intensified by a subtle but profound shift in the declared purpose of the 28,500 American troops stationed on its soil. For over 70 years, the mission of United States Forces Korea was understood with crystal clarity: to deter aggression from North Korea and defend the South if deterrence failed. This singular focus was the bedrock of the US-South Korea alliance. However, recent statements from American military leadership have signaled a significant evolution in that mission, one that reorients its focus from Pyongyang to a much larger adversary, Beijing. This change is ringing alarm bells across South Korea's defense establishment. The new thinking was articulated most starkly by USFK Commander Xavier Brunson. In a recent statement that sent shockwaves through Seoul, Brunson asserted that troops on the Korean peninsula serve purposes that extend beyond deterring North Korea. He provocatively described South Korea as the closest allied presence to Beijing, effectively defining the country as an island or a fixed aircraft carrier floating in the water between Japan and mainland China. This reframing of South Korea from a partner to be defended into a platform for projecting power against China is a fundamental alteration of the alliance's character. The idea that its land could become a fixed aircraft carrier for the United States transforms the alliance from a protective shield into a potential liability. The parade in Beijing, the furious reaction from Washington, not just a passing diplomatic spat, tremors signaling a tectonic shift in global power. The world is witnessing two competing blocs hardening. On one side, Xi, Putin, Kim together in Beijing, a visible Eurasian axis, united by opposition to American dominance, bound by shared authoritarian ideology, seeking to rewrite international rules. Their military weight, their economic weight, their political weight poses a formidable challenge to the US-led post-Cold War order. On the other side, the United States trying to rally democratic allies in Asia and in Europe, complicated by internal divisions and the Trump risk. Allies like South Korea and Germany wary of direct confrontation with China or Russia because of deep economic ties. Trump's transactional approach, doubts about US reliability have weakened crucial alliances. This creates a power vacuum, China ready to fill it. Implications for international security are immense. The era of US-backed stability is giving way to intense, unpredictable great power competition. For middle powers like South Korea, existential challenge.